This is a representation on Google Maps of kind of the Miracle Mile area where the La Brea sinkhole opens. What I've done is I have overlaid the sinkhole from the La Brea show. So you can see a little bit of what goes away in this tragic incident. Okay? Now, I know that it's not perfect. What I've tried to do is use this building up here as a center point, but it's not exactly perfect because the angle that I got on Google Maps is not aligning correctly. But another landmark we have here is the Peterson Automotive Museum, which if I bring this back down, you can see is right over here, the Peterson Automotive Museum. This is a building that is featured in the opening. It has almost kind of a zebra stripe exterior of red and silver. So one more time, I will bring up the opacity. We can see the hole, and then I'll bring it down slowly so that we can see all of the things that kind of have fallen into the hole. Now, in the pilot, they are at an intersection, and I do struggle to understand exactly which intersection, since so much of this seems like one big block of area, and then we have small blocks over here. But after identifying the general area that was affected by the sinkhole, I spent some time investigating that area on Google Maps. I don't think that the Peterson Automotive Museum has many visitors early in the morning. And actually, that's a really great thing to bring up as well. Eve is taking Izzy and Josh to school. And apparently it's a legal something or other that Los Angeles high schools don't start classes before 8:30 in the morning. So we can guess, since Eve also seems to be running a little bit late, that it is between 8 and 8:30 because she needs to get her kids to school and then she needs to get herself to work. Now, the La Brea tar pits themselves are over here. Now, you can see that these two buildings over here, which seem pretty unique in the cityscape, these two buildings survive. So if we take a look at Google Maps, we can sort of say that the hole stops here, right at this street, and extends down to here at this street. As I said, I don't see any specific cross streets, but I do see some streets that are sort of meeting Wilshire Boulevard right here. So what I did was I tried to count the number of lanes and cars that were on the road when we see Eve running through traffic and also her reacting to the whole opening in the middle of the intersection. What I came up with is there was a 6-lane road. I believe it's a 4-lane road with 2 other lanes, if you will, of street parking. That being said, all of the spots were taken, and so in my calculations I came up with 132 cars, only on one road and only in one section. So if we were to assume that where the traffic cop is standing is the center of the hole, and we were to take in the sort of general area that we're working with, I would say that we have to pick Ogden and Wilshire. Our other option would be Spalding and Wilshire. All of this leads me to believe that this is the intersection where the hole opens. There's a park over here. It doesn't look like a park in this picture, but there's a park over here where we see people exercising, going for walks, that sort of stuff in the opening shots. But following my logic here, we have Eve, and I guess we should say everybody else, right? Running up the road away from everybody else, and we actually see this building, 5900 Wilshire, fall into the hole, like break and fall into the hole. And then we know that the hole stops right around here at the Peterson Automotive Museum. I counted cars that cover the amount of area that Eve ran, and that would cover this area here. So within that area, I counted 132 cars, and the U.S. Department of Energy, in their Transportation Energy Data Book, edition 39, says that as of 2018, the way that they average the occupancy per vehicle is 1.5 people. So if we take 132 cars and we multiply that times 1.5, then we end up with 198 people in 132 cars. Is this a fair assessment? Maybe. Now, in my calculations, I also doubled that because my initial instinct is that there was an intersection, which is why we needed this traffic cop. But if there's not a cross street to make an intersection, maybe it's not okay for me to have doubled the numbers. But also, if we take each one of the side streets, let's say that's 1, 2, 3-ish side streets, those would all be 2 lanes apiece. If we add them up, we would have 6 lanes, which is a 6-lane highway, which is kind of what I was talking about for Wilshire Boulevard. So we could double that number. We end up with 396 people. And I still don't think that we're getting everybody in cars, but we're going to stop at 396 for that. So the next thing I investigated was this building over here, which is 750 Spalding Avenue, also known as the Wilshire Galleria. This particular building has 118 units in it. If we were to assume that one person lived in each one of those units, that's 118 more people. But this is Los Angeles, and I would think that you probably have a roommate or some family members, maybe a spouse, something like that. So I don't know if it's fair to say 118 people. Just in the interest of estimate, I'm going to go with that 1.5 occupancy number again, which makes 177 people, or 573 total between one building and the cars. To that end, each one of these buildings is an apartment building. Let's say best case, these are townhomes or something, or maybe apartments above commercial space. If that's the case, we still have people living there, but at least it's a lesser amount of people than an entire building that is multiple floors. Now, when we look up the Miracle Mile in Los Angeles, we're talking about this space outlined in red. But when we talk about the La Brea Hole, we're actually covering an area from here to here. And say we get the tar pits in there as well, then we're kind of looking at something like this. If we look at statistics related to populations in the Miracle Mile area, as of 2010, we're looking at a number of 7,554 projected up only about like 100 or so people by 2015. So now let's try to place that logic in the context of the circle that we have here. There's a much larger area that contains a lot more people. Very true. However, one of the buildings that we lose is in fact a 31-story office building. And while it is 8 to 8:30 in the morning, I think it's safe to assume that some people are at work. I don't think that the building is probably at full capacity, but I think it's safe to assume that there are people at work and people at home. And if one of our buildings gives us 177 people, I think we can lowball and say that there are at least 3,000 people that probably fell into the La Brea Hole, if not more. We could have some people, for example, that live in these neighborhoods or this area that are maybe running in the park in that morning. We could also have the same from people who live over in this area. Just as easily, we could have some of the people in the apartment buildings who are off at work elsewhere. So roughly, I would say that 3,000 is a pretty conservative number for the amount of people who have fallen in this hole. Not to mention, the number 3,000 makes it much easier for me to come up with a percentage of survivors. And that percentage, if we're following Mary Beth's observation that 30 people need to travel back through the light to get home, then that means 1% of people survived the fall into the La Brea Hole. This is about the same amount of people who died in 9/11. And as you look at this amount of space, you might think that doesn't sound right. But bear in mind that the World Trade Center was looking at 110 stories, but this building that we have starred in the middle here, 5900 Wilshire, only has 31 floors. So in terms of stacking, I think that we have a solid number here. I would venture to say 3,000 to 5,000. But again, in order to be conservative, I think we're going to say 3,000 people fell into this hole, and if only 30 survived, we may as well say that 3,000 people died in this hole. And just in case you're thinking, well, I saw a lot of people running away from their cars, I think they survived, like Izzy. Okay, that's fine. But I think I'm lowballing the number at 3,000, so I'm just going to keep it there.